Okay, so we just talked about signal transduction and how peptide hormones generally trigger these signal transduction cascades that lead to these quick responses in cells. Now I want to sort of focus on the actual binding of the hormone to the receptor and talk about some of the principles that govern that event or that behavior, okay? Starting with specificity, right? So first of all, I just want to review this term, ligand. A ligand is a molecule that binds a receptor. So in this case, the ligand is going to be the hormone, right? So yeah, so we have this concept of specificity when we're talking about hormones and how they bind to receptors at their targets, right? So if you think about what I talked about earlier in this set of lectures, remember that I said that hormones are secreted into the bloodstream, which means that they're going to reach all over the body, right? So they're going to go everywhere, right? But how do you manage to elicit a response only in the specific cells or organs where you want a response to happen? Well, that comes up, that's the issue that we are addressing here, right? So like I mentioned before, only cells with the receptor to that hormone are going to respond to that hormone, right? So that's illustrated here. We have the endocrine cell secreting hormone into the bloodstream, okay? It's going to elicit an effect in the target cell, which has a receptor for that hormone, right? But there are lots of other cells in the body that don't have a receptor to the hormone, right? So they're not even gonna notice that the hormone is there, right? So you can kind of think of this as like sort of like Twitter, right? So if you're following a certain person on Twitter, that's going to be you. You're going to be the target cell, and you're going to get that message that has been sent by that person that you're following. If you're not following anyone, you won't even know. You won't even know that that person has sent out a tweet. Okay, here is another concept that I want to remind you of, this concept of competition, right? So a ligand, such as a hormone, is going to bind to its receptor. And if you remember from your previous classes, it's the shape of the hormone and the shape of the receptor, right? They're complementary to each other. And that's what allows them to bind to each other, okay? But it's also important to note that there are also a lot of other molecules around in existence, or yeah, either that occur either naturally or are synthesized, okay, that can mimic the action of the hormone, right? So if you have a molecule that's similar in shape to the hormone, then it can bind the receptor, okay? And in some cases, you're going to get a binding such that you activate the receptor and you activate that second messenger system, that signal transduction cascade that your hormone normally would have elicited, right? So that kind of molecule is called an agonist. So an agonist is going to bind to the receptor and give you that same response that the normal ligand, the normal hormone would have given you, okay? On the other hand, there are some other molecules that are also similar enough in structure to your primary ligand, your normal hormone, right, that are going to be able to bind the receptor also and will actually block the response that you would normally get by binding to that receptor, okay? And that kind of molecule is called an antagonist, okay? So agonist, antagonist, okay? I do want to point out a lot of drugs, either naturally occurring or synthesized, are agonists or antagonists, right? So for example, morphine is an endorphin receptor agonist. So we have these naturally occurring molecules in our bodies called endorphins, which make us feel good, right? Morphine can mimic that activity, right? So morphine is going to bind to that endorphin receptor and also make us feel good. Okay, that's part of the reason why morphine is addictive. Okay, and then antagonists, well, there are a lot of them, but one example is beta blockers, which you may or may not have heard of. So beta blockers bind to these receptors that usually lead to an increase in heart rate, okay? But since they're antagonists, they will bind to that receptor that usually leads to an increase in heart rate, and they will block the action of that receptor. So the ultimate result is to bring down heart rate, is to lower heart rate. So so beta blockers, if you've heard of them, they're used a lot to lower heart rate in people who have heart problems.